Good morning, everybody. Yesterday, the Fed released a document describing their proposed central bank digital currency, widely described as the Cbdc for central bank digital currency. I want to talk about it. It's got quite a bit of stuff in there. There was a lot of rumors. Well, not rumors, but the Fed discussed it unofficially a number of times. Quite a bit of what was discussed previously has now been made much more palatable to the general public as well as to the banks. I think we need to talk about it as a society, and anyone interested in economics needs to talk about it. So I'm going to start with a conversation about the Fed and about the balance sheet, because really that's where it starts. This digital currency would be derived out of the balance sheet, and so we need to start with the Fed balance sheet. We're going to have, okay, so when the Fed was begun back 1914, I believe it was. They started by having all the banks send in money to the Fed. If you didn't do this, you couldn't participate. You'd be under restrictions and basically a lot of negativity from the Fed. Primarily, now these are not gold coins, these are US dollar coins that look gold. Primarily, they were sending in gold. Banks all around the country sent gold to their local Fed, their regional federal bank, Federal Reserve Bank, and then those went to the Fed itself. So all this gold came in. I don't know exactly when, but also the Treasury put silver coin, which these aren't real silver because they're not real gold, but at the time all this was real. There was no clad silver, there was no gold colored coins. It was all the real deal. So on this side of the balance sheet, I think that's how you spell that, they had assets. Those, to me, if they were gold and silver, they would look like an asset to me. That would make a lot of sense to describe those as assets. Now, the whole goal of the Federal Reserve, well, there was multiple goals, but one of the important things they were going to be doing is dealing with money. So, at the time, the Treasury would print paper money, which this again is not of the era. It'd be nice if I had some, $20 gold pieces, real silver dollars, and a real silver-backed dollar bill, but I don't have those things, so we're gonna pretend. But this is basically what it looked like. All these banks send the gold. You would take a gold coin, put it in the bank. Your bank would send it to the Federal Reserve Bank, which would send it to the Federal Reserve itself. And in return, your bank would get, in this case would be $20. See if I have a $20 bill. There we go. Your bank would get a $20 bill sent back from the Federal Reserve. And then you could go to the bank and get your $20 bill out of the bank. And you had an option. You could ask them for this if this is convenient for you. Or you could say, I want this. And they'd give you a gold coin if they didn't have enough on hand. This is where reserve requirements came from, because you didn't know exactly, as a banker, you didn't know how many people were going to come in today and want their money out of the bank. How many were going to want a gold coin? How many are going to want a $20 bill, you had to guess, and so a certain amount of reserves were required to just make sure you didn't run out of money that day. Now, this other side of the balance sheet at the Fed is liabilities. And this kind of makes sense. This is the asset, the gold coin. This is the paper derivative of the gold coin. This represents that, and this is not as good, but it's the promise. You now have you're liable as the Fed. If I bring you this $20, at the time, a $20 bill, which was gold backed, they had a liability of knowing they owed me this. They would take that, and I would get that, and I would leave with it. Of course, I would do that through the system of the banks. There would be multiple steps in the process, which is called intermediation, which we'll get to as well in the process of reading up on the central bank digital currency. So this is where the balance sheet came from. Now, it was a little bit more confusing when you look at the yearly balance sheet, because initially the Fed was not printing these. They were coming from the Treasury. These were all coming from the Treasury because the Constitution has the Treasury printing or minting coin, and they still do. The Treasury actually still prints out the money, but they no longer do it for themselves. Now they only do it at the order of the Fed. The Fed ordered this $20 bill to be printed. The Treasury went to the printer, printed it up, and they charged the Fed a few cents for the paper and the ink. That was it. Where these, the Fed said, hey, send us a dollar coin. 1971 it was. And so the Treasury printed it up, or stamped it out of copper and tin and whatever's in here. But when it got to the Fed, they didn't see that this was printed from the Treasury. They put it on this side of the balance sheet. This was printed from the Treasury in the mint. Oh, look at this. This goes over here. They had to pay the mint for this with some of these to get this. In 1971, 20 of these, the Fed would have to pay one of those to get it. But they didn't pay anything with the paper price and the ink price to get this. So if you're confused, that's okay. It's not. it happened slowly over time, and it's a process. This originally was gold. It was an asset. It had to go on the asset side of the balance sheet. Now, along the way, this got more interesting because, as we know, these coins are not gold. In 1933, there was a conversation, well, more than a conversation. There was a major change in how the Fed functioned, and their policies were changed. Gold was made not a part of the system. They still kept silver coin, but the gold was no longer a thing. So, I forgot one key point. I think I mentioned it, but to clarify, initially some of these paper, like if you find an old dollar, it will say Treasury note. This is a Federal Reserve note. I don't know exactly when this happened, but they began printing Federal Reserve notes against assets. So if you ask, well, why can't the Fed just print us a bunch of money, get us out of a situation, or if you've heard of the platinum coin. Well, what's the point of the $1 trillion platinum coin? Why can't they just print 1 trillion of these? There has to be something on the asset side for the Fed to print the liability. It's like you have to get a phone line in your house if you want a phone bill. If you want a phone bill, you don't just get a phone bill without having an account with the phone company. Same idea. There was money and there was the bill, the dollar bill for the dollars of assets. So in the Depression, they had huge problems. They wanted to devalue the money. They had a problem with people wanting to come to the bank and say, hey, you know what? I have a feeling you're printing more of these than you're supposed to. I'm just going to throw that on the counter and you're going to give me one of these. And they realized that was going to be a problem because they had printed more of these than they should. And this is why they were able to change the value of gold, but they had to take it out of the system. It had to become illegal for you to have this and ask for it. So when that happened, there were still the US silver dollars, but that wasn't really considered the primary asset. The collateral. These things in the asset sides are collateral. So what happened right at the time they got rid of this gold is they put on this side bonds. Now, it might seem a little strange that because a bond is where the Treasury says, I want to borrow some of these. And so they offer you an interest rate. You give the Treasury this. They give you an IOU for this, which is an IOU of this. And then they put the IOU. If the Fed buys that bond, that goes on its balance sheet. Well, in 1933, they changed the rule from this gold to where now, if you have $1 of bonds, excuse me, if you have $1 bond, you can print a paper dollar. This is what the Fed can now do. Now, this is the culminating point in this whole story. When this happened, this balance sheet went from being something that made sense. You have an asset that's collateral against a liability. It's like when you go to the bank and you say, I want to borrow money off of my house. They say, oh, there's a house. We can give you a loan. This is the equivalent of that. We have an asset, like a house or a gold coin, that's collateral for a loan. That's the liability. Then you got to pay back, or whoever owes has to pay back. But then we got rid of the gold coin. And we have now an IOU, one of these over here, because it can't go on the same side, right? I mean, if it's a liability of a liability, this is just like math. A negative of a negative is a positive. Isn't math fun? But this is where we are today. This is why the growth of the balance sheet is so important in the Federal Reserve. And it's key to understanding the central bank digital currency and how it's going to roll out, or it's likely to roll out. I say that because this new paper that's come out has addressed so many of the concerns, at least in the way it's phrased and the way it's directed to the public. Many of the things that were on the previous versions were startling and disturbing, and it looked like there wasn't going to be a banking system anymore. But this has what's called intermediary involvement. So just like how, I guess I'm getting a little bit further into this, but just like how originally I would give a gold coin to the bank, they'd give me a bill, then they would say, oh, they need another bill, and they'd print, when this got here, they could print another $20 bill. It all happened in the bank. I didn't go to the Federal Reserve. They didn't know my name. They just sent it to the bank. That's the intermediary process. This central bank digital currency is being described in the same way. Where the previous versions, the idea was you'd have a personal account at the Fed. This one does not describe itself that way. That's not to say it wouldn't eventually get to that potentially. But in this case, we all know there's roughly $8 trillion in assets at the Fed. They're not all bonds. About half of that is mortgage-backed securities, leaving, 4 or 5 trillion in bonds that can be used as assets, collateral assets for the Fed to print. Not this. See, this has always been, the Fed has only ever printed this. Now there's people, I can give you hours of footage of online experts, YouTube experts, who will state up and down, swear on a stack of Bibles, the Fed cannot print money. The Fed printed this, and all they did is call up the Treasury. It didn't print in their home. It wasn't in the Federal Reserve building. They called the Treasury. Treasury printed it. They paid for the paper. They paid for the ink. If you don't consider that printing money, that's fine. I'm going to describe that as printing money. And even on this, if you read this Cbdc paper, they describe it as printing money just the same as I am. So what's going to be different is we have all those bonds. They don't want to print more of this. They have been printing somewhat more, but they only need, if people need more bills, they print more bills. If the banks are like, no, we got a bunch of those, we don't need, well then how do you print more money? If people don't really want that, because you're not just giving it away, except when you're sending out a check or whatever, but that comes from the Treasury. They did that with bonds. So they're going to have a digital thing just like this. They're going to be printing and what they're claiming now is they don't want to end cash. Now, there's probably reason to be concerned that the cash will eventually end, but in this recent paper, they're saying they're going to continue printing these bills just like they've been, but then they're going to have a $20 digital asset. Or, well, it won't be an asset because it's a liability. Cryptocurrencies are called digital assets. This won't be a digital asset. This will be a digital liability. But it will be in every way the same. Well, it'll be categorized differently, the way they're talking about it. They will differentiate this from this. But they specifically say it will come from the liabilities side of the balance sheet. And this is what they're talking about when they mean that. Or what they mean when they talk about that. Is it will have the same origin as the $20 bill. It just won't be a $20 bill. Most of us probably thought this is already how the system worked. We knew we had money in the bank. I got $20 in the bank. I know it's not necessarily a green paper in the till. But what we didn't know is that was just the bank's accounting. So in the past, all of this digital money, it was just in your bank. It's never been on the Fed. The Fed has never just gone over to the computer and typed in add $1 million. They've said they do that, but they've never done that from the liability side of their paper, of their balance sheet. They can do that by buying bonds with nothing. They just say, oh, I'll take those bonds. And the bonds come over to the balance sheet, which is effectively printing money, but they're adding it to the asset side. It's always been the asset side. Now, this is from the liabilities. So, in a sense, you have a potential for double whammy. Because if I, as the Fed, if I go and I buy an IOU $20 bond and I put it over here on the asset side, well, $20 that I just invented goes to the treasury because they printed up the IOU and now they have $20 in their account. They're going to spend it because this is the US government. So they just spent $20 into the economy. This $20, as the Fed, I'm looking at this $20 saying, wouldn't it be nice if we could stimulate the economy? If for instance there's a reason to stimulate the economy, which there often is, well, I can take that $20 that I can take the bonds, the IOU of the $20 I just gave the Treasury, and from that $20 IOU, it's now a collateral asset, a pristine, as they say, collateral asset, which I can make another $20 digital $20 bill equivalent out of. So what they just did is create $40. Half of that's going to have to get paid back. But normally the problem with this whole system is that they do this. The Treasury gets $20. It goes through the economy. And eventually it's time to pay back the $20. So they have to tax the money. And they tax the money out, but there's nothing left. There's not enough of these. There's a tiny fraction of printed paper compared to all the bonds in existence because we've gone into debt more than we have money. But if we can create more money for every debt, every $20 of debt we create, if we can create $20 of money, then there's not a problem. Then everything can get paid back. You don't have this debt collapse that constantly happens. So in a sense, it's a wonderful fix to a problem. The secondary problem, though, is you end up with more and more money. They add more to the asset side, more to the liabilities. They keep balancing it out. Because you got to understand, this would go here, then they would print this. That's how they balance the balance sheet, is by printing more money. It wasn't like, oh, let's put money over here, and let's balance it with money just the same over here. No, they put this here, and then they have $40 over here, and $40 over there. So the outcome of this is an increase in the money supply. Now the one strategic move that might take place, at least in theory, is that this digital currency might be something that has time limits on it. They might say, oh, we need the next 6 months to be stimulated. We're going to put all this digital currency out in the economy, and you can spend it in the next 6 months. After that, it's not any good. Those kinds of issues, or those kinds of techniques, might address the issue of hyperinflation. It might be something they're intending to try, because if they print this, how are they going to get it back? The only way to get this back is through taxation. And you don't know who you're going to tax and when and all that. This, you can track that digital token down. You know exactly where it is. It's right in the computer. It's just going from hand to hand, from person's phone to person's phone, from cash register to wherever. We did this, and this isn't really clarified. They mention a few things about timing and some of the abilities of dealing with this, but that'll be something to look for. Do they put ways of getting this back if they've overspent or overprinted? Even if they do, it could become painful to bring these back. You might find that every time you try to get it back, you cause problems in the economy, and you go back to buying more bonds and back to creating more digital currency. If that cycle continued, that could end us up in a state of hyperinflation. So anyway, this is the first step you need to understand if you want to understand this central bank digital currency. There's a lot more to discuss, but this is what they're describing. This is what they're saying they want to do, or they're proposing that they do. They've been talking about it long enough. It's pretty clear they do want to, though. You know, the official statement there is that they're not advocating for or against it. They're just giving the information, let the public discuss it. It's pretty clear they're a little more interested than that. Anyway, I hope this made sense. Have a good day, and I'll be talking more about this whole thing soon.